Joining me now is Marc Henderson. He is the president and CEO at Laramide Resources. Great to see you, sir.
Yeah, great to see you, Mark.
So, a snapshot of the company here. You've got the 5 uranium projects in the U.S. and Australia. You've got a couple of flagships. You released a PEA for Crown Point Church Rock, and you're saying it's long life, low cost, high margins. What are some of the other highlights of the PEA there?
Well, I think it's just what you said. I think it's one of the probably the largest, if not the largest ISR resource in the U.S. now. Cameco obviously had the biggest one at one point before they started mining it out in Wyoming, and you've got a number of other ISR players. And this one is one of the ones where, in terms of bringing the information to the marketplace, we're probably bringing up the rear a little bit. But a number of the other companies that I'm sure you've interviewed here, have at the show, a lot of that stuff was sort of in care and maintenance for the entirety of the Fukushima downturn. So we have one that has not been put in production yet, and we're just lagging those guys a little bit. But I think as we get this information out into the marketplace, I think people are going to take notice just because of the scale of it. I mean, your ISRs grade-wise are all typically fall into the same kind of range. I mean, the grades in the American ones are not a lot different than the ones in Kazakhstan. Obviously, Kazakhstan and ISR production is the biggest source of uranium in the world. So I think it was just a good exercise for us to put this into the marketplace, show people that we have something of scale, and wrap some economics around it. And now we've got to attack the final permit we got left, and then it's shovel ready, and we'll build it.
Right, we've talked to a lot of companies that are exploring and restarting projects in Wyoming. It's obviously a very interesting jurisdiction, a lot of advantages to it. So Crown Point Church Rock, you say, is late stage. What does that mean in terms of a timeline to development? Fairly short term, longer term?
Yeah, it's medium term, and only for one reason, related to one particular permit. The permitting in the U.S. breaks down between the so-called agreement states and the non-agreement states. The agreement states are sort of effectively like in Canada, if the provincial jurisdiction handled all of the regulatory matters around nuclear, like say the Canadian regulator does for Cameco. In the U.S., you have either you default to the federal, which is NRC, or the state does it in its entirety, like they do in Texas and Wyoming, and they handle the nuclear piece. In our case, we've got a bit of both. We have all the federal because when we bought the asset, we were the royalty holder previously, but we bought the asset, collapsed this very kind of owner's royalty on top of it, and we had to have the energy license transferred to us. And then the missing piece was there's one state permit, which is a key permit around water quality and restoration, and that got reorganized in 2015, and they made the standard more challenging. We just have to re-up the permitting to the more challenging standard, and then we're effectively shovel ready at that point. So if you break down the timeline is the time to get to the government giving us the permit in our hand. I call it shovel ready, and then building it. The beautiful thing about an ISR is it's quite low capex and quite short timeline to production because of the nature of what you're building.
Right.
Vis-a-vis a big complicated open pit mine or something where you have to sink a shaft or something that's super remote. We have those advantages as well, in that we have obviously infrastructure. It's in the middle of America.
Right.
There's power and roads and all that sort of thing.
Let's head over to Australia and Westmoreland, where you're drilling. You've got some results confirming expansion potential, according to the company, and there's a real goal of resource growth this year, and you've got a multi-rig program underway. So, give us more details.
Well, it'll start in a couple of months because there's a distinct seasonality to exploration in Australia, particularly northern Australia, because of the wet season, dry season, they call it monsoon and all that sort of thing. So we'll be in there as soon as we can, which is probably latter half of April into early May. We had one rig last year, drilled 4,000 meters. We get a lot of information because it's very shallow deposit. It's a very good big deposit already, and it's commercial already. But it always benefits from being bigger. In terms of being bigger, in terms of possibly being a little bit better, or in terms of more mine life and that sort of thing. This is a project because of the production scope of it at 4 million pounds a year. I think it was scope when it was last done. That's of obvious interest to the utilities. I mean, it would be a sort of a top 10 global uranium mine in terms of scale, and so that lends itself to, carving up a fair bit of it to a whole bunch of different utilities. And you're really there, this industry, uranium developers and explorers, we're really there at the end of the day to serve the utilities, and that's your end customer. And so this is the type of asset that they'll be very happy about if and when we get around to building it.
Now, can you explain what you mean by, at Westmoreland, what you need is a change in policy or a change in the state government to get the startup of mining?
Sure. Yeah, they've had. I mean, it's hard to understand because there's been so many twists and turns in Australia's sort of love-hate affair with uranium over the years. You know, they had this 3 mines policy that a lot of people still think is there. That's a legacy that was a legacy of one political party, the Labour Party, the left of center party. That's gone away federally for a long time, but they left it to the states to decide what they wanted to do. Some of those states, particularly Western Australia and Queensland, when they're in power, they have kept that policy and say we don't like uranium mining, primarily because the Green Party, who they're competing with, it was really their primary driver. I mean, the Greens got Greenpeace, things like that got founded on being anti-nuclear. So it's kind of a big legacy. It's the last kind of legacy of that whole, you know, no nukes era from the early 70s and that kind of thing. And Australia's kind of the last country that I think is finally going to get rid of it. I don't know if you've seen what's happened recently in Sweden, where they basically had a very strong Green Party there. I mean, that's Greta Thunberg's home base. And they're now going to get rid of the anti-nuclear policy there. So I think there's a bit of a template there around the world that you can see this kind of thing is going to gradually go away. The other thing that can happen, of course, is there's an election. So there's an election in October. They've currently been in for 3 terms, I think. So 9 years. That's kind of that's what you get in a 2-party democracy. So we're pretty optimistic that they're probably out, and then we're good to go.
Okay, very good. Now, lastly, you've been running Laramide Resources since 1995. You've seen a lot of cycles in the uranium sector. So how do the tailwinds in this current cycle compare to, say, 06, 07? And how does Laramide fit into that whole scenario?
That's an interesting question. I think if you look at uranium, you've had 3 big booms, you know, over the last, 30 or 40 years. The first 2 booms were really affiliated with really one nation effectively going nuclear and deciding they wanted to put a lot of nuclear capacity online in a short period of time. In the 70s, it was the United States. You know, in the last cycle, that was really a China Inc. driven cycle. And so I think the one differentiating factor now is we have an even stronger market than we had then. And we don't have that one huge driver that you had from before. So it's the demand is a lot more broadly based. I mean, it's still primarily probably Asia-centric to some degree, but you've got the Middle Eastern states now trying to build nuclear. They built 4 very high-quality things in the UAE, and obviously they were the sponsor of COP and what have you. So I think the base is broadening out. The demand underpinning is very strong. That's without any SMRs, and that's a sort of shiny new object that people can get up to speed on in terms of nuclear. It's it's sort of not your father's nuclear, and I think it's kind of being sold as a better version of technological version of nuclear for those that still have trouble with the technology. And so I think it's got a very good broad-based underpinning. So I see the sort of being higher for longer kind of thing. I think we're going to get up to these kind of elevated prices, which have moved up a lot. Let's not kid ourselves. You know, and these prices, frankly, for anybody who's got a development asset, a legitimate development asset, I mean, this is high enough to bring on those projects. But we're going to need more exploration, and we're going to need more new discoveries.
Right. Great stuff, Marc.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Marc.
Marc Henderson, President and CEO at Laramide Resources.